Hello and welcome to Vetenskapsfestivalen, the International Science Festival of Gothenburg in Sweden. And this is our digital program. I'm happy to be with Gregg Bucken-Knapp tonight, and he's a professor of public administration at the University of Gothenburg. His recent research involves migration and integration from a knowledge-based perspective with a focus on migrant experiences. And if you've ever wondered what do migration and integration sound like, then you're at the right place. So I'm happy to welcome Gregg.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thanks to the Science Festival for having me. I really appreciate being here this evening. I appreciate that all of you are here to listen as well. So my name is Gregg. I'm a professor at the School of Public Administration at the University of Gothenburg. And what I want to talk to you about tonight is a project that's called Soundscape, Reading, Reflection, Response, which is built around the question, what do migration and integration sound like? And this is a project that resulted, the end product is a sound collage, an audio collage. And an audio collage, if you're familiar with a regular collage, which is a paper collage where you cut out different types of paper from magazines or different types of artistic paper and paste them together, and audio collage is very similar, except it works with different sound files coming from different types of focus areas. The end result, which we'll be getting to later, is an audio collage that builds on a very important idea that simple, everyday sounds constitute important data. When we hear things, what we hear can have meaning and can communicate understanding and knowledge. It also documents how the students I work with in the International Summer School at the University of Gothenburg were introduced to thinking about the research process. It's an undergraduate course. Many of them coming from different countries around the world have different levels of experience of designing and implementing research. And I just wanted to give them some big picture, broad brushstrokes guidance on how to think about research and really try to show them how messy it can be. Because the audio collage is also a piece of audio art, and it brings listeners into different migration settings recorded all around the world, and it shows that there's a messy reality when we do research, that it's not something that's straightforward. But we'll be getting to all of that in a bit. What I want to begin by explaining to you is, as said, this is the result of a course that's taught in the summer at the University of Gothenburg in the International Summer School. So students coming from all over the world, they know they've signed up for a course called Managing Migration. And Managing Migration is taught in the School of Public Administration. And many students might have a preconceived notion of what public administration is. But about a month before the course starts, the students get an email from me. And in that email, I ask them, prior to coming to Gothenburg, I would like for you to think about the following big question. What do migration and integration sound like? And I don't give them a lot of information about why I'm asking that question, but I do give them guidance. And that's the way we're going to go through this presentation today, is I'm going to walk you through the different steps that the students took in the course to work with different audio files, gradually showing why we were doing what we were doing. So they get an email from me at the beginning of the course saying, what do migration and integration sound like? At this point, they're still in their home countries. I give them some sample ideas in the email. Perhaps you think that migration and integration sounds like a crowded airport. Maybe it sounds like the sounds of waves hitting the shore of your country. Maybe there are specific neighborhoods in your community that you think, this is an example of migrant integration or lack of migrant integration. Or maybe you think in very bureaucratic terms, and you think of government offices in your city that migrants go to, and you think about the doors that are opening or closing. So I give them some examples to try to get them in the thought process. And I say, spend some time thinking about this, and then go out in your community before you come to Gothenburg, record 2 sounds for 90 seconds each, 2 broader soundscapes. Only choose places, of course, that are publicly accessible and do not require any permission to access. Here we're thinking of ethics, and of course we're thinking of ethics when we say that people should not be recording any sounds that would violate an individual's personal integrity. So big crowd sounds where you can't hear individual voices, that's fine. Anything where we have perhaps just ambient noise of traffic or shopping centers, those sorts of things are fine, but not conversations with people, because we don't have a system in place for them to guarantee permission. So we need to think of the integrity here. And in essence, what we're doing is we're beginning this project by asking the students to record a soundscape around the world, picking sounds of migration and integration. And a soundscape sounds like a technical word, but we can talk about it in a rather straightforward way. It's everything that our ear is exposed to in a specific sonic setting. So if you were to perhaps go to a movie one night and leave the movie and go out onto the crowded street after the movie, everything you heard around you on that street would be a soundscape. Or it might be that you suddenly walk into a supermarket and you hear the cashier and you hear people asking how much something costs, and you hear people throwing things into a shopping cart. All of those sounds combined are a soundscape. So soundscapes, individual sounds, we say that they help us, they say compose localities, but we can say make sense of places. They help us understand, make sense of places, and they help us try to impose some type of order on the world around us. We have an understanding of the world around us, of course, from how we see it, but for those of us, of course, who also have hearing, we can begin to make sense of places by listening to them. And then by the act of recording them, and the students usually recorded simply using their phones, they're taking something that is temporary, which is hearing those sounds on the street, in a government office, at a train station, on an airplane, something that's temporary, something that wasn't going to last, and by recording it, they make it permanent. And that allows us to do something with it later. So that's the first part that we have. Students get an email. What do migration and integration sound like? We give them some advice about how they can think of different ideas. We tell them 2 recordings, 90 seconds. Make sure you pay attention to different types of integrity issues. And here's just a quick list of what we get from the students. These are just some examples. For example, one student in Thailand recorded sounds at the airport before flying out. Another student went to a citizen's advice office in Germany and just sat in the hallway recording the sounds of various footsteps and doors and echoes. Another student went to an outdoor flea market in Romania. Another went into a grocery store in Copenhagen. One student sat on the plane and recorded the sound of the airplane engines as they hummed as the flight came from Hamburg to Sweden. Another student did something that was really interesting, which was to record rainfall. And by recording rainfall, what the student was doing here was not simply documenting sounds of migration, but was also beginning to create data, to think about how rainfall might have significance for a migrant in one way or another. And then people recording sounds in tube stations in London, city centers in Slovenia, in Korean neighborhoods in Tokyo, Japan, and at train stations in Warsaw. And these are just some examples of the types of sounds that students listen to. And they submitted these individual audio files to the course website. And these individual audio files are not the collage at the end. They are the building blocks for the collage. But what I want to do is I want to take you a bit behind the scenes science. And I want to play you just a few excerpts of the raw data files, the raw audio recordings of these different locations. And so we've just got 3 of them right now, just a few seconds each, not the full 90 seconds, just to give you an idea of the type of audio that they recorded when it came to places. So let's go back to the beginning there. This is a citizen's office in Germany. You can hear the bell signaling someone can go into an office. Doors closing. Bell signaling. This is the tube in London coming into a very
train to Wimbledon. The next station is Tower Hill.
Into a very immigrant-heavy neighborhood, East London. And then this is a student at an airport who followed other people who were walking around with luggage and just recorded the sound of the wheels as the luggage was being pulled through the airport. So it's that these are just the raw files. These are the building block files that the students submitted. And they didn't really, at this stage, know why they were doing this. They uploaded the files, they came to Sweden, and then we sat down as a group, as a full class, and we began to talk about why we were doing this, why this was important, and how this can shape our understanding of doing research. And what we discussed was that recording soundscapes, spending time in a place, and thinking, how does a place represent migration or integration in a different way, one way or another, allows students to begin working with data, allows students to become inspired by settings, to capture those settings, and now to say, this is a representation of somewhere. This audio file is data showing me what communities experience in terms of being heavily migrant communities, or in terms of mobility and the flow of people through different types of transport hubs. But it's working with data in a way that many undergraduates in the social sciences are not familiar with. Students in the social sciences are familiar with working with data that's interviews. They go out and they talk to a person on the city council, they talk to somebody who's affected by a policy, they talk to somebody who works at a civil society organization, maybe they analyze official documents, maybe they analyze media, perhaps they carry out small public opinion surveys of a few people to understand how they think about an issue. But most of them don't come from a background where they think about how sound captures a type of awareness, a type of knowledge, where when you listen to a place, you begin to think about, that's what's going on there. These are the types of experiences. Here are the things that intrigue me. Here's what I'd like to know more about. So they're getting used to working with data as inspiration, and they're getting used to working with data that they're not necessarily familiar with. But they record these soundscapes before they come to Sweden. They upload them. We have the conversation, and they realize, wow, what Gregg had us do was collect or make data. So you have this data, but how do you make sense of it? It's just raw data. And in research, our data is informed always by a back and forth relationship with the scholarly literature. We use the scholarly literature, research articles, and research books to make sense of the data that we collect. There's an assumption among many students that how this process works is that we do the reading and then we collect the data. And sometimes it can work that way, but a lot of times it's a constant back and forth We read, we collect data. We collect data, we realize we need to read more. And in particular, we find things that happen in the field that we need to explain, that we need to have a better understanding of. So in the first part of the project, the students recorded audio of soundscapes, migration and integration in their home countries. But then in the second part, students began to engage with the research literature, but still in a way that would lead to an audio file. Because what I asked students after that first week was, why did you record this soundscape? What is it that you thought was interesting about it? Why did you choose to record something at an airport, a train station in Poland, a Korean neighborhood in Tokyo? What is it that struck you as interesting there? Write down some keywords, write down some thoughts, ideas on a piece of paper, whatever you think is going to help you begin to organize and structure your thoughts. And then, like all researchers, once you have this sense of, here's what interests me, what you need to think about is, well, what have researchers already written about this? What exists out there in the research community that I can use as a tool to better understand the data that I have collected? So I said, go over to Google Scholar and look for just one journal article that will help you make sense of your soundscape, and an article that you find very interesting in one way or another. And to give them some guidance on this process, I said, perhaps it's an article that really addresses the theme that's in your recording. Many of the students were very fascinated by transportation, so they chose to record train stations, bus stations, taxis, things like this. And this is a clear example of mobilities in migration, of course. Others were very fascinated by cultural diversity, going and searching out neighborhoods in their communities where there was a large migrant presence. But maybe they weren't as interested in the case. Maybe they were interested in bigger picture ideas as well, certain concepts, certain theories, certain approaches. Perhaps they really wanted to reflect more on the relationship between their sound and what it says about a multicultural society, or the way in which migrant flows occur, leaving by flying, leaving on a train, and push and pull factors for why people move. Or maybe they were interested in the method of what does it mean to be a researcher once they discovered that that's what they had been doing, standing on a street corner in a gigantic city with their phones, capturing small moments that they were doing ethnographic field work. So gave them some guidance there on the type of information that they could think about to help them pick out one journal article on Google Scholar. And then, of course, when you find an article, you need to do the critical next step, which is to read it. Read the article from start to finish that you think is going to be of interest, but look for sentences, look for quotes, look for material in that article that would help the student understand and contextualize and make sense of that soundscape in one way or another. And then they should highlight those sentences, highlight those quotes that they think are interesting, and look at those quotes. Forget the rest of the article now. Just focus on those individual quotes and ask yourself, well, why was that intriguing? Why was that inspiring? Why was that interesting? And then if you think of research as something that's not isolated, but happens with other people, what quotes in that article could they imagine themselves sharing with others, talking about with others, that they find so interesting that they would want to say, hey, I want to read you this because I think you're going to find it fascinating too. Remember when I did that recording at the airport in Thailand? I just read an article. Here's a quote that I think informs it somehow. Or here's an article that I think says something really cool about Asian neighborhoods where there's this large diaspora community from other Asian countries. And from there, they had to make a new recording, their second recording in the second week of class. This time, one recording, 45 seconds, where they read the quotes that they think were most fascinating. I told them, of course, don't try to put too much information, don't try to speak too quickly. Speak in a very natural tone of voice, pace yourself so that others who might listen can follow along with what you're saying. And, well, first we can just show you some examples of the types of articles that they picked. And they picked some of the really, I'd say, standard thematic types of literature that students and researchers who are trying to make sense of migration and integration would choose. They picked articles having to do with welfare problems that migrants face. They picked articles that have to do with social networks, airport travel, diaspora communities in London, and something that I thought was really fascinating, which is, why do first-generation migrants feel more lonely than other people who live in that country? And I can tell you that the student who picked that article picked, it was based on a soundscape where what she had recorded was rain. And she thought about rain in relationship to migrant loneliness. So these are the articles they read. And what we can do here is the same as last time. Just some of the raw files. Again, not the final collage, but the raw files. We can get a sense of some of the things they said, what quotes they picked that they thought were specifically interesting.
Migrants experience more emotional and social loneliness due to a lower satisfaction with social relationships and lower participation in social activities. Having social relationships does not protect individuals against loneliness when these are not fulfilling ones.
The Shin-Okubo region was deemed as the living proof of Shinjuku's, and by extent Tokyo and Japan's, acceptance of foreign culture in its territory. Yet the interpretation to be taken out of this should be precisely the opposite. Shin-Okubo is a good example of what Foucault called heterotopia, a space for difference that act in ways to make clear the distinction between the other and the hegemonic.
So each of the students chose a quote that somehow informed the soundscape they had recorded before they came to Sweden, that showed something fascinating about what they had been reading and how they related it to that soundscape. And they uploaded that to the course website as well. And then we got together one more time. We had a conversation about their recordings. And one of the things that we all realized very quickly, and I'm glad that they understood this, was that reading a quote by itself has no context. They've read a part of a journal article. They've recorded part of a journal article. They have a soundscape. They have a recorded quote from a journal article. But what we don't know is that process that takes place in the head of every researcher, where you've got some data and you've got some literature, and you begin putting them together in your head, and you begin thinking about how they fit, what their relationship is, and what it is that you learn as a result when you begin mulling over, thinking about how the literature informs your data, or maybe how your data is different from what the literature says. And that process, of course, is quite simply reflection. And that's where students go ahead and make sense of what they have learned. So you will not be surprised to know that the next part of the project assignment for them was going to involve doing one final recording. And in this, what I asked them to do was to listen to the recording that they of themselves, where they had recorded the journal article quote, and this time do one 45-second recording again, one last recording, where they listen to that quote they read, they've listened to the soundscape, and they stand back and they ask themselves, what is it that I know now that I didn't know before? what is it that interests me now that I didn't think so much about before? What is it that I would like to pursue in terms of a research idea that I hadn't considered before? In other words, asking them to document how recording the soundscape and doing the journal article reading had changed them as people, had changed them as researchers. And just like with the other two parts of the assignment, gave them some guidance here to help them to think about reflection, and to say, maybe the quote that you had recorded earlier, does it focus on a term or a theory that you hadn't been familiar with, but you think it's really appealing? Wow, I didn't know much about multiculturalism, but now I think that could be really helpful to allow me to understand X. Or I didn't really know much about the way in which shopping patterns for migrants says something about their integration or lack of integration. Did it describe a case that seems worthy of consideration, in other words? Or did it describe a method of data collection, a way of analysis that seems especially intriguing to you? And some students discovered that what they were interested in was doing statistical analysis and doing surveys. Others discovered what they were interested in was using methods that involve drawing. And all of these are reasonable choices if it helps you say something about the data that you've collected and its relationship to the literature. So we gave them these types of suggestions. Take a look at methods, think about specific places that might structure immigrant inclusion, perhaps interesting in talking about migration and the way in which it's reflected in social media, if that's something that was in your journal article. Or in an international course, you wouldn't be surprised to know that many of the students are migrants themselves. Many of them have spent large periods of their lives living in different countries or going to school for extended periods of times in different countries. And maybe when they read those journal articles and think about their soundscapes, they begin to reflect on their own experiences as a migrant. And it helps them not just better understand data that has to do with other people, but it helps them understand data that has to do with them. So just like before, let's go ahead now and let's listen to a little bit of the reflections, this third recording that each student did. And again, these are just examples from the raw data files. It's not the collage itself.
Yes. So to be honest, I'm really interested in what happened after the arrival of migrants in a new country. Because a lot of people think that the hardest thing for them is their trip from their original country to the new one. Of course, it's really hard. However, they forget that they will face a way longer trip once they will be in the country. They will face a lot of new problems, a lot of new difficulties.
I thought about how this can relate to migrant integration, as cities often serve as multicultural hubs where migrants interact with locals. The continuous flux of people can mirror the adaptability of migrants, enriching the urban fabric. Public spaces like the station facilitate social interactions and economic opportunities, building connections and networks.
So what we have now is we have over 100 recordings. That's a lot of data. We've got a third of the recordings are the soundscapes, the places and sounds all around the world of migration and integration as captured and imagined by the students. A third of the recordings are them reading journal article quotes, the literature in which they pick quotes that somehow interest them, that somehow they think inform. And then a third of the quotes where they begin to talk about out loud the sense-making process of what they've learned by spending some time in the field recording data and what they've learned by picking journal articles that inform that. And this is where I have a real problem. This is the practical challenge suddenly for me. How do you organize this? You've got over 100 data files, Gregg. How do you organize it for other people to make sense of? How do you present this? Because of course, if we look just at the individual soundscape files, we can say, look, these will allow us, if we listen to them, to experience places. We can turn the audio on, close our eyes, and we begin to experience places where migration and integration exist by hearing them. We use our ears to get a form of embodied sensorial knowledge. We can experience the ideas of scholars by hearing the students read them. We can experience the reflections of the students by hearing what they recorded. But they're only individual files. They don't do something that I think is really critical when you're trying to communicate to students how research is a process that is not always straightforward. Individual files don't convey how complex or how messy research really can be. So to solve this, and to solve it in a way that highlights for students this back and forth between the field and the research literature and your own thoughts, but also to invite all of you into this process, these individual audio files are edited and they are assembled then into an audio collage. And if you look here, the graphic on the screen shows this is just a screenshot of from the audio editing software of the final assembled audio collage of 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And you can see that there's certain elements that run through it all, and then certain strategic elements that are dropped in at different places. And there is, of course, an aesthetic consideration to this, that in the final collage where I've chosen from the places where the students recorded, the soundscapes, where I've chosen from the journal articles that interested them, and where I've chosen from their reflections, there's an aesthetic consideration here of how I can combine those, how I can take audio files and put them together as a collage, just like a paper collage, and use layers of sound playing simultaneously so that we have both ambient experiences of places together with spoken word. And what it does, one hopes, is that it shows that it's not a linear process. Research, when we think about the data, in this case the soundscape, the setting, the reading, the research literature, reflection, all of these interact. All of them can take place, if not exactly simultaneously, very close to one another. And even if we have a plan to move from one to the other to the next, more often than not, when we do research, we're going to find that we move in different directions throughout the process. And of course, when you hear the ambient, the soundscape, the hope is that we'll encourage audiences to reflect about spaces where migration and integration take place. Because it's different to hear a sound that's a bit mysterious, that you don't really know what it is, than to read a journal article where it tells you that there's X number of refugees living in a certain community. You experience that knowledge, you learn in an entirely different way. So we also have an emphasis here on the way in which data then is made and collected. Many of the students, I would argue, collected data if we want to think of it, conceive of it in that term. They stood on a corner, they stood in an airport, and they collected data. But they also made data by choosing to record at certain times, by choosing certain sounds, by choosing themselves to interpret something as being migration or integration. They were making data. And that's a really important conversation to have with undergraduate students, that data is not just collected, data is also made. And the final point that we hope to make with the collage is the idea that research can be thought of in different ways. I'm in a school of public administration where I work with a lot of really talented people who do excellent work with statistics and do excellent work with different types of document analysis. And what they do is they are able to use their data to reach conclusions that involve hard data, numbers, specific words, and they categorize these and they run it through software and they come up with results. And that's good and that's necessary. But that's just one form of research. There's other forms of research or other forms of finding knowledge where we would say we're less interested in this idea of something that's hard and fast, and we're interested in how our audience responds. When they hear audio, what is the sensorial response? What do they begin to think about? What do they reflect about? How does it evoke a certain emotional response in them? How does it foster reflexivity? And how do we look at this type of research, collecting audio data, combining, coming up with a collage that uses aesthetic considerations, and say, we didn't have a result that shows hard data that shows X or Y, but rather it's very ambiguous. And that ambiguity is actually a really important step in the process for other people to continue thinking and to continue asking questions. So what I'm going to do now, the entire audio collage, you'll be seeing a QR code at the end for the full audio collage, is about 9 minutes and 29 seconds. I'm not going to play the full audio collage for you for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. What I'm going to do is probably play the first minute and a half to 2 minutes so that you can experience the way in which sound is layered. And what I've done is I gradually build from specific settings and combine multiple settings and then begin putting student quotes on top of that. So let's listen to a couple of minutes of that, and then I'll have one more point to make.
Välkommen till Migrationsverket.
The second factor related to the area of settlement and whether it was characterized by long-standing diversity in which no dominant group existed, or whether the area was dominated by either a white British majority or one ethnic minority.
While living in a segregated and immigrant-dense neighborhood, contact with neighbors may be an important element in the construction of new social networks. Measuring contact is quite a complex task, and individuals' family networks and the location of their homes affect the tendency to socialize with neighbors.
On the other hand, there are local or international non-governmental organizations, public bodies, and local administrations providing food and non-food items, counseling, healthcare, legal advice, language classes, or interpreting services.
This process is set into play even before immigrants arrive in the new country, shaped by social norms in their country of origin and by personal factors such as demographics, attitudes, and travel skills developed in their country of origin.
Migrants experience more emotional and social loneliness due to a lower satisfaction with social relationships and lower participation in social activities.
We find evidence that confirms a positive association between air travel and first-generation migration background.
In the urban environment, a metaphorical returning to the interior can be represented in the underground transport system throughout taking a journey.
This is
And so I said, that's 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And it's something that's assembled as an audio collage where, while it has a technical beginning and a technical end, and it does build, it's a piece of work that can be listened to really from any one point to any other for 30 seconds or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, or the entire thing. And it's been used in installations at University of Gothenburg, and it's also going to be available tomorrow at Nordstan, and I think that Emmeline is going to say a bit more about that. But one thing you've noticed is that we've talked so far about soundscape, reading, and reflection, a process by which students go into the field, record audio files of what they think migration and integration sounds like, how they come to Sweden, do reading of scientific journal articles, record those, how they reflect on their process as a whole and make an additional recording, and then how I utilize these different files as parts of a collage and pick and choose and edit and cut and assemble and make something that is both an aesthetic product but also a product that is trying to show the complexity and messiness of the research process. But one thing you're probably wondering is, well, what's response? What's the final part in this project? And the final part in this project is, of course, to put it out there in the world and to give people such as yourselves the opportunity to listen to it, to think about it, and then to share your thoughts with us. That I'll be showing you a QR code in a second. The entire audio collage is available on a website, and you can listen to the collage. And then if you'd like, there's a link in the description there that you click on, and that will take you to a website where, if you would like, you can record your own anonymous feedback to me about what you've listened to. And it might be that you listen and you don't think about it for several days, and then you think, yeah, I've got something I want to say, or yeah, this reminded me of my own migration or experience, or gosh, why don't researchers do more of this or less of that, or what does this really tell us about teaching, or why is this considered to be data? Any of these thoughts. And you might decide you want to go and record them. And there's a link there where you're able to do that. And as we say, please understand that if you do record, it's anonymous. Don't make a recording if you don't want any of your audio to be shared in this type of setting. We'd like to be able to utilize what you have to say for other people to hear about in the future. And so you can find this if you scan this QR code. You'll find Soundscape, Reading, Reflection, Response, and you'll have the chance to listen to the whole thing, start to finish, just little bits. And then if you feel like it and you'd like to record something anonymous, you'll be able to do so. I'm going to stop there because we've got just a little bit over 15 minutes. And if you have any questions, if there's anything that interests you about this, I'd be happy to answer those questions. So I'm going to stop there and say thank you very, very much.
Right, I forgot to put my mic on. I was saying, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope that in the audience you also enjoyed it as much as I did. And I will for sure pay a bit more attention to the sounds that are around me from now on. I do not see any question in the chat, so I guess no one has any question for you. But I would like to thank you all for being here with us tonight. And as Gregg said, if you want to learn more about it and happen to be in Gothenburg, you're welcome tomorrow in the shopping mall Nordstan from 10 to 6 to listen to this audio collage. And then at 3 p.m. For another lecture about the collage. Do you have something else to add?
The only thing I was going to say, yeah, for those who might choose to come tomorrow, that we have a summary of the entire project on a flyer that includes the QR code. So you can come tomorrow, you can listen to it on headphones that we'll be providing. And then if you want to take a flyer to go off and listen to it at some point and maybe provide us with a response, you can do that as well. And that's tomorrow at Nordstan. Be there from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Great, thank you. I would like to remind you that tomorrow's lecture is unfortunately cancelled, but we still have 2 lectures, one at 3 p.m. and one at 6 p.m. on Sunday, using the same link. I hope everyone had a nice time, and we'll see you soon. Bye, thank you for being with us.
Bye.